When a man says he needs space, what he really means is that he's already found somewhere else to breathe. That thought didn't come to me right away. It took months of silence, of learning how to sleep on one side of the bed, of making coffee for one instead of two. But looking back, that's when it started. The quiet, the kind that hums like a low note in your chest, the kind that means something's dying. It was a Thursday evening, one of those dusky spring nights when the sky turns honey-colored before giving in to gray. I was at the sink, rinsing plates from dinner, when Daniel came home later than usual. His tie was loosened, his shirt slightly wrinkled. He looked tired, not the kind of tired that comes from work, but from carrying something heavier than ours. He stood in the doorway, hesitating like a man rehearsing bad news. "Mary," he said, "we need to talk." My hands were still in the sink, warm water running over my fingers. I turned the faucet off slowly. "About what?" I asked, already knowing it wasn't about bills, or the roof, or anything that could be fixed with money. "I just, I need some space," he said, "to think about us, about everything." His voice was calm, careful, like he'd practiced that line in the car mirror. I remember the smell of dish soap and lemon in the air, the way the light from the window fell across the counter, making everything look still, frozen. I didn't cry. I just nodded, BAFTA. Because what do you say when the person you built your life around suddenly says he needs to step outside of it? He moved out 2 days later, said he was staying at a short-term apartment near the office, just until things settled. He packed light, like he was going on a business trip, left his cufflinks, his golf clubs, even his favorite mug. I told myself it was temporary, that maybe a little time apart would do us good. 20 years of marriage, people go through rough patches, right? But that first night alone, the house felt strange, too quiet. I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the floorboards I used to ignore. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the couch, and stared at the TV without hearing a word. The air smelled like the stew I'd cooked hours earlier, gone cold now. It reminded me of all the dinners we'd shared, and all the ones I'd be eating alone if the space turned into something else. Days became weeks. Daniel called once or twice a day, usually late, saying work was busy. His tone was polite, detached. He asked about our son, about the dog, about my mother's health, as if checking boxes on a form. When I asked him if he was coming home soon, he'd sigh and say, "Not yet, I just need more time." I stopped asking. Instead, I filled my time with things that didn't ask questions: gardening, baking, reorganizing the pantry. I even started walking in the evenings, passing couples holding hands, neighbors grilling on their porches, kids riding bikes. I smiled, waved, and kept walking. But inside, something was unraveling. It wasn't until my friend Lila came over one Saturday afternoon that she asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Mary," she said softly, "are you sure he's just thinking things through?" I laughed it off. "You've seen Daniel. He's not the type to do something reckless." She gave me a look that said she wanted to believe that too. Still, that night, her words stayed with me. They whispered in the quiet, between the tick of the clock and the sigh of the wind outside. I started noticing small things, little cracks in the picture. I'd been painting for myself. Daniel had stopped wearing his wedding ring. The photo of us from our anniversary dinner had vanished from his office desk when I visited to drop off his lunch. His calls grew shorter, his voice distracted, and once, just once, I heard a woman's laughter in the background before he hung up. I told myself it was a coworker, but deep down, I knew that laugh didn't belong in the same space as my husband's voice. By the 3rd month, even our son had started asking questions. "Mom, is Dad coming home soon?" I told him yes, but my heart didn't believe it. That weekend, I decided to drive by the apartment Daniel said he was renting. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe proof that he was telling the truth, maybe peace. What I found was a front desk clerk who looked confused when I asked for him. "Daniel Harris," I said again, certain I'd heard correctly. She checked the register, shook her head. "Sorry, ma'am, we don't have anyone by that name here." I stood there for a moment, clutching my purse, my mouth dry. "Are you sure?" He said he rented one of your short-term units. She gave me a sympathetic smile. "We don't do long stays here. Maybe you've got the wrong place." I walked back to my car in a daze. The late afternoon sun was sharp and unkind, casting long shadows across the parking lot. My heart was thudding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I sat behind the wheel for a long time before I could start the engine. That was the moment I realized my husband didn't just need space, He needed distance, enough to build a lie big enough to live inside. And somehow, I was the only one who hadn't seen it coming. After that day at the apartment complex, the world seemed to lose some of its color. Every familiar thing in my home, the couch we bought together, the framed photo from our trip to Savannah, the dent in the wall where our son used to toss his ball suddenly looked like evidence of something fading. It was as if I had been living in a photograph that someone else had already walked out of. Days slipped by quietly, one folding into another. I moved through the house like a guest, keeping everything too clean, too orderly. His absence wasn't loud, but it was everywhere: in the unmade side of the bed, the empty space on the coat rack, the silence after dinner. Even the dog stopped waiting by the door around 6, as if he, too, had finally accepted that the sound of Daniel's keys would never come again. I began to notice things I'd never paid attention to before. The faint hum of the refrigerator that filled the kitchen when the world went still, the way dust settled faster on his old bookshelf. How the evenings stretched longer, as though time itself had started to conspire against me. Lila's words replayed in my mind on a loop, soft but relentless. Are you sure he's just thinking things through? The question followed me through each day, through the mundane rhythm of grocery aisles and laundry cycles. I didn't want to be the kind of woman who snooped. I'd always believed that trust was sacred, but what do you do when trust starts feeling like denial? It started with small searches, receipts, emails, the digital footprints we all leave behind without realizing it. His phone bill came in my name, and when I opened it, I saw unfamiliar numbers. One repeated itself, almost daily. Often late at night, the digits etched themselves into my mind. I didn't recognize the number, but I recognized the pattern, the kind of consistency that belongs to intimacy. I didn't call, not yet. Instead, I began driving, little drives at first, to the grocery store, to the edge of town, to the old lake where we used to have picnics when we were younger. But each time, my eyes scanned the streets like they were trying to speak. I didn't know what I was looking for, only that I'd know it when I saw it. Weeks passed, and the number kept appearing. Once, I tried tracing it online, but all I got was a vague listing, a neighborhood a few towns over, a quiet, middle-class suburb where lawns were trimmed and windows glowed warm at dusk. I couldn't sleep that night. By morning, I had made up my mind. The drive took 40 minutes. It was late afternoon, the sky low and gray, heavy with the promise of rain. I remember my fingers gripping the steering wheel, knuckles pale, heart pounding in rhythm with the turn signals. Each mile felt like a confession I hadn't yet spoken. When I turned into the street, the number was linked to. I felt it immediately, the sense of something being wrong and right all at once. The neighborhood was calm, too calm. Children played in yards, sprinklers whispered across manicured lawns, and there, the end of the was a beige 2-story house with navy shutters and a car I recognized parked out front. Daniel, car. The sight of it hit me like cold water. Not the shock of betrayal that had already started growing roots inside me, but the cruel confirmation of what I'd been too afraid to name. I parked down the street, engine off, heart hammering so loudly it drowned out the world. For a long time, I just sat there, watching. The curtains of the front window were drawn halfway. I could see the faint movement of shadows, someone walking past, a silhouette against the light, then laughter, soft, unmistakably female, and then, his voice. He was inside that house, not at a rented apartment, not at a friend's place, a home, a fully furnished, lived-in home. I stayed until the sun dipped below the trees, until the lights inside flickered one by one, settling into the warm, domestic glow of evening. It looked like any other family settling in for the night, except that it wasn't my family. I was the ghost outside, watching my own husband build a life without me. When I finally drove away, my hands were trembling so hard I could barely keep the car steady. The rain started halfway home, soft at first, then fierce, as if the sky had been holding back, just like I had. The wipers moved in steady rhythm, clearing the windshield, but nothing could clear the fog inside my chest. That night, I didn't cry. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the spot where his pillow used to be. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the heater and the steady tick of the wall clock. Each second felt heavier than the last. I thought about all the words I'd said to him over the years, words of comfort, forgiveness, faith. I thought about the way he used to reach for my hand under the dinner table when we hosted friends, about the morning coffee rituals, the shared routines that had once been love's proof of life. Now I understood. While I'd been keeping our home warm, he'd been building another dot. In the morning, I woke early. The air felt different, thinner, sharper. I made coffee out of habit, but it tasted bitter, metallic. I opened the curtains and let the light in. Even though it revealed too much, the lines around my eyes, the hollow in my chest, the truth in my reflection. For the first time in my marriage, I felt something I couldn't ignore anymore. Not rage, not despair, just clarity. The kind that comes when a woman realizes she's been living in someone else's story for too long. That day, I began collecting myself in small ways. Filing papers, checking bank accounts, writing notes, not because I wanted revenge, not yet, but because I needed to remember what was mine. Because love may make us blind, but betrayal teaches us to see. And I was finally starting to see everything. The days that followed felt strangely calm, almost too calm, like the hush before a thunderstorm. I didn't confront Daniel right away. Instead, I moved through my routines like a woman rehearsing her old life, while quietly preparing to leave it behind. There was a stillness in me now, one I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't peace exactly, more like the cold steadiness that comes after heartbreak has done all the damage it can do. Every morning, I brewed my coffee, opened my laptop, and started gathering the pieces of my life, bank statements, mortgage papers, insurance files, the kind of details I used to leave to him. For the first time, I looked at them like someone learning the language of their own freedom. Each number, each signature, each password was a small step away from the woman who had trusted too easily. The truth began to expand in front of me. Daniel hadn't just moved in with someone. He'd built a whole new existence, a house in both their names, furniture bought from our joint account, utilities connected to our address. It was as if he'd taken pieces of our life, our savings, our trust, and rebuilt them somewhere else. I remember one afternoon, sitting in front of my computer, staring at a receipt for a payment I didn't recognize, a furniture store, the same store we used to browse together on weekends. The address matched the house I'd seen. It was all right there in front of me, the proof. The betrayal, the quiet cruelty of being replaced in secret. But the strangest part wasn't anger. It was the stillness, the understanding that the man I'd spent 2 decades with had been fading for years, and I had refused to see it. I started journaling, something my therapist, years ago, once told me to try when I felt lost. The first page was shaky, written through tears I didn't even realize were falling. But as the days went on, my handwriting grew steadier. Each line was a small reclamation, my pain, my confusion, my truth. I wrote about the woman in the beige house, though I didn't know her name yet. I imagined what she must think, what he must have told her. Did she know about me? Did she believe she was the only one? Or had they both convinced themselves that deceit could ever lead to happiness? One evening, I drove back to the neighborhood, not to confront him, but to see. It was dusk, that soft blue hour when everything looks both honest and secretive. The house glowed warmly from the inside. Through the kitchen window, I saw her, mid-30s, maybe early 40s, moving around the counter with easy familiarity. A life unfolding in real time, where mine had been paused. Daniel appeared beside her, laughing at something she said. His hand brushed hers, and just like that, I knew she wasn't a fling. She was a replacement. I stayed only a moment longer, then drove away before the grief could catch up with me. The wind outside howled through the half-open window, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and burning leaves. Somewhere between the exit ramp and the long road home, I whispered something to myself, a vow I hadn't planned to make. You don't get to break me twice. From that night on, I stopped waiting for apologies. I stopped checking my phone for his messages. Instead, I focused on building a plan, not out of revenge, but out of preservation. I called a lawyer, quiet and efficient, the kind who didn't flinch at the words joint account misuse. I gathered copies of documents, took photos, made lists. Each act was small, methodical, but it gave me back the power he'd been slowly draining for years. A week later, Daniel called. His voice was calm, casual, as if nothing had changed. He said he wanted to come by, pick up some things. I told him that would be fine. Inside, my heart raced, but my tone stayed steady. When he arrived, he looked thinner, not in body, but in presence. He carried the faint air of someone juggling 2 lives and losing control of both. He smiled, that tired, practiced smile, the one that used to melt me. But this time, it didn't reach his eyes. He walked around the house like a visitor. I watched him pick up a few shirts, an old watch, a framed photo from our wedding, that he turned face down before putting into his bag. I didn't ask questions, he didn't volunteer answers, and yet, in that silence, everything was said. After he left, the house felt lighter, emptier, yes, but also mine again. The walls exhaled, the quiet wasn't painful anymore, it was peaceful. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. When I woke, sunlight filled the room, soft and forgiving. I made coffee, poured it into my favorite mug, and opened my journal to a fresh page. The words came easily this time. He's gone, and I'm still here. There was a strange beauty in that realization. Not triumph, not yet, but a flicker of something that had been missing for years. Self-respect. Over the next few weeks, I began reclaiming the pieces of my life that didn't include him. I painted the living room, rearranged the furniture, donated half of what we owned. Each change was small, but together they transformed the house from a monument of loss into a space of healing. And when the lawyer called to confirm the paperwork, the frozen accounts, the filed separation, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. No shouting, no chaos. Just quiet certainty. Daniel still didn't know that I had seen the house. He thought he was keeping a secret. But what he didn't realize was that the power of a secret only lasts as long as the silence of the one it hurts, and I had no intention of staying silent much longer. There was one thing left. I needed closure, not the kind that comes from confrontation, but the kind that comes from facing the truth, standing in it, and walking away with your head high. I wasn't ready yet, but I knew it was coming. The day I'd stand at that doorstep again, not as a betrayed wife, but as a woman who had finally remembered her worth. That day would come soon. The morning I decided to confront Daniel, the sky was the color of ash. Not dark, not bright, just the kind of gray that feels like it's holding its breath. I hadn't planned it, not exactly. It wasn't anger that drove me, it was clarity, that quiet, undeniable moment when you realize you've gathered every piece of truth you need, and there's nothing left to lose. I dressed simply, a dark coat, flat shoes, no makeup. The woman who used to fuss over appearances before difficult conversations was gone. What mattered now wasn't presentation, that was peace. I drove without music. Every turn of the wheel brought back flashes, the dinners, the anniversaries, the promises whispered under the same sky that now seemed too wide, too indifferent. I kept my hands steady, my breathing even. By the time I turned onto the quiet suburban street, my heart was beating with a rhythm that wasn't fear, it was resolve. The house looked smaller this time, stripped of mystery. It was just wood and paint, a place that had borrowed pieces of my life to build something false. I parked across the street, sitting for a moment in silence, letting the world slow down before I stepped out. A light drizzle began, soft as breath against the windshield. It carried the scent of wet earth, clean, grounding. I took it as a sign. When I reached the door, I didn't knock immediately. I looked around, the garden neatly trimmed, wind chimes swaying, a welcome mat that read home is where love lives. The irony made me smile, faintly, bitterly. Then I knocked. 3 steady taps, the kind that say, I'm not here to beg, I'm here to end this. Footsteps. The door opened, and there she was. The woman from the kitchen window. Close up, she looked younger than I'd thought, or maybe just unburdened. Her expression was polite, cautious, until recognition flickered in her eyes. Can I help you? She asked. Her voice was gentle, but I could hear the question beneath it. Do you know who I am? Yes, I said quietly. You can, I think we need to talk. She hesitated, then opened the door wider. For a moment, we just stood there, 2 women bound by the same man's lies, both trying to understand what part we played in his story. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and lemon polish. The living room was tidy, but familiar. I saw our old side table, the one Daniel and I had bought from a thrift store years ago. The scratch on its corner was still there. My breath caught for a second. Daniel's not here, she said, sensing my pause. He's at work. That's fine, I replied. I didn't come to see him. I came to see you. Her brow furrowed. I'm sorry, I don't understand. I nodded slowly, then took out the folded photo from my pocket, one from years ago. Daniel and me, smiling in front of our first house. I placed it gently on the table between us. Her eyes widened. Color drained from her face. He told me, he said you were separated, that you moved away. A soft, humorless laugh escaped my throat. I can see he's consistent. He told me he was working late. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rain picking up outside, tapping lightly against the windows like an impatient heartbeat. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear, I didn't know. I believed her. There was too much shock in her voice, too much raw confusion to be an act out, and strangely, that made it easier, not harder. I'm not here to blame you, I said softly. He made his choices, so did I, when I looked away from the signs. Her eyes lifted to mine, searching, perhaps, for anger or accusation. Instead, all she found was weariness. I loved him, she said finally. The words cracked a little. I thought he was honest with me. I nodded. So did I. The truth of it hung between us, heavy, quiet, and freeing. It wasn't about who had won or lost. It was about the cost. We talked for a while, not as rivals, but as women caught in the same storm. She told me how they met at a conference, how he'd charmed her with his patience and warmth, the same traits that had once made me feel safe. He'd told her stories that blended parts of our life into his new one, same memories, just with a different name attached. By the time I left, she was crying quietly. I didn't comfort her, not out of cruelty, but because I knew that grief was something she'd have to carry now, just as I had. You can't soften the truth when it finally lands. It has to hit, break, and clear space for something new. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled clean again. I stood by my car for a moment, looking back at the house, not with bitterness, but with something close to gratitude. It had been a mirror, showing me what I'd refused to see, that Daniel's betrayal wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my return to myself. When I got home, I made tea and sat by the window. The world looked different now, sharper, more honest. I thought of the woman I'd been, always waiting for someone else's choices to define her life. She was gone. And in her place was someone quieter, but stronger. The phone buzzed. Later that night, Daniel's name lit up the screen. I let it ring. Then I turned the phone face down and whispered, "Not tonight." I didn't need to hear his excuses. I didn't need his closure. Because standing there in the rain, facing the truth head on, that had been my closure, for the first time in years, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt free. And that freedom, once found, doesn't ask for permission. It had been 3 days since I visited that house. 3 long, silent days where the air in my own home felt lighter, but also strangely hollow. Daniel hadn't come home. He hadn't called, not once. But I wasn't waiting anymore. That part of me, the one who counted hours, who searched for headlights in the driveway, who tried to make sense of silence, she was gone. I spent those days quietly putting my life in order. I canceled the joint accounts, called my lawyer, and began the paperwork for separation. Each signature felt like a small act of self-respect. Every document I signed wasn't just about ending something, it was about reclaiming the parts of me I'd lost while trying to hold something broken together. It's strange, the things you notice when you start taking back control. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. The quiet wasn't heavy, it was peaceful. Even the ticking of the clock in the kitchen, once a reminder of waiting, now sounded like rhythm, a pulse of a life moving forward. On the 4th evening, I heard the familiar sound of a car door slam, then footsteps. Daniel. He didn't use his key, he knocked. That small act. The knock told me everything I needed to know. He no longer saw this place as his. I opened the door. He looked tired, older somehow. His clothes were rumpled, and his eyes darted past me into the house as if checking whether it had changed without him. "Mary," he said quietly. It was the first time he'd said my name in weeks that didn't sound like an apology wrapped in pride. I stepped aside. "Come in." He hesitated before walking in, as if he didn't belong there anymore. And maybe he didn't. The living room was neat, the faint smell of lavender from the candle I'd lit that morning still hanging in the air. He stood in the center of the room, looking around, his gaze landing on the empty space where his favorite chair used to be. "I sold it," I said simply, before he could ask. It didn't suit the room anymore. He nodded, but his eyes softened, that kind of softness that only comes when reality finally catches up. "I heard you went to see her," he said after a pause. "Yes," I replied. "She deserved to know the truth. We both did." He swallowed, his voice tightening. "She called me. She told me you were kind to her." I smiled faintly. "Kindness isn't weakness, Daniel. It's clarity." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. "I don't know what to say. That's the problem, I said quietly. You always had so much to say when you were lying. Now that the truth's here, you've got nothing left. He looked at me then, really looked. For a moment, I saw the man I once loved, standing there stripped of excuses. The man who used to make me coffee in the mornings, who once promised that nothing would ever come between us. But those memories no longer hurt. They just were. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, he murmured. A tired, familiar line. You didn't mean it, I said softly, but you still did it. The words hung between us, heavy but calm. I wasn't trying to wound him, just to let the truth land. Finally, without anger or pity, he sat down slowly, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. I thought I needed space. I thought I'd lost myself. And did you find yourself? I asked. He looked up, eyes red. No, I lost everything. I nodded. Sometimes, that's the only way people learn. He wiped at his eyes and gave a bitter little laugh. You sound so sure, so calm. How can you be so calm after everything? Because I stopped needing answers, I said. I stopped trying to fix what wasn't mine to fix. He shook his head, as if trying to piece it all together, the version of me he used to control with guilt, and the version standing in front of him now. He couldn't reconcile them, and that was fine. It wasn't my job to make him understand my peace. I want to make it right, he whispered. I'll sell the other house. I'll stop, I said gently, cutting him off. This isn't about houses or money. It's about respect. And that's not something you can buy back. For a moment, we both sat in the stillness. The clock ticked. Outside, a car drove by, and its headlights washed briefly over the walls, pale gold light flickering across framed photos, old and fading. I realized something then. I didn't hate him. I didn't love him either. I'd reached the rare, quiet, middle ground, indifference. That was real freedom. He stayed a little longer, talking about things that didn't matter. When he finally stood to leave, I walked him to the door. I'll sign whatever papers you need, he said softly. His voice trembled. I hope someday you can forgive me. I gave a small, tired smile. Forgiveness isn't for you, Daniel. It's for me, and I already have. He blinked, maybe realizing that was the real end. Then he nodded, and without another word, he stepped into the night. When the door closed behind him, I didn't cry. Instead, I turned off the lights, poured myself a glass of water, and stood by the window, watching the rain begin again. But this time, the rain didn't sound like sorrow. It sounded like renewal, like the world washing itself clean. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams, no memories, just silence. And for the first time in years, that silence felt like home.